When you'll see this video, I will already be gone. With my hard-earned retirement, I can afford to disappear. I turn this page off my life, hoping they never find me. Because I decide to expose everything and shed light on the shadow mafia, the video game mafia, worse than the Camorra. I hope my confession will alleviate some of the harm I may have done. Here is my story. I am, or rather I was, director of the Neural Research Center on Video Games. I was chosen to lead this center because I am an international authority in the neural field, at the origin of recognized work and great scientific advances. But like Faust, Goethe's hero, who sold his soul to the devil, I too was blinded by easy money, and I put all my science to fight science and to produce an oriented science. This research center was financed by occulted fortunes whose name you have no interest to whisper in your dreams. Our mission was to spread the culture of video games in every country, all ethnicities, and all age groups, by acting on the mechanism of the brain to create in place a total addiction to video games. I know, you think entertainment games, educational games, intelligence games can be very beneficial, right? But this idea, correct by the way, it's precisely we who helped to spread it in the world. We used innocent but unprofitable games as an alibi to lure parents and their children into the nets of action games, war games, and total virtual games that constitute our core market. Because it allows players to become addicted using some techniques whose secret we master. The strategy was in the first stage to tame the parents, to manipulate journalists, and to gain the confidence of politicians to make them, if not favorable elements, at least neutral elements. Our pitch to parents was this: it's up to you parents, educators, to coach children in order to make the right choices. Any product is double-edged. For example, the consumption of sugar can give that. But it can give that too. It's all about dosage. By drowning the fish in this way, we put all the responsibility for deviance on the back of the family, the school, the mass media, and the politicians, and not on video games. The main thing was to avoid at all costs shedding light on the link between video games and play addiction. It should remain taboo, because nothing should stand between us and this financial windfall. On a purely financial level, my work on addiction had largely contributed to the growth of the turnover of the video game industry, who reached in 2020 $180 billion, more than the GDP of 45 African countries. The results spoke for themselves. 3.2 billion plays, while the world had 700 million illiterates. 46% of women in the world turned into gamers. An average age of plays now of 35 years old, whereas at the beginning of our research, video games mainly concern teenagers and a constantly increasing daily playing time, in parallel with the reduction in hours devoted to sport and cultural activities. A real cultural revolution. And since money has no nationality, no race, and no moral, these spectacular results have attracted the greed of venture capital and the international investment companies concerned about short and medium-term profitability. All this with an economic model free to play, because the first funding resource is either visible advertising banners, either product placement inside the game. The second model is the pay-to-win model, which invites the player to spend real money in order to acquire virtual currency, to buy game elements necessary for the played character to look good and win, costumes, weapons, etc. The third model is the loot boxes model, equivalent to casino games of chance. In this case, you pay to access a random reward, which in fact only enriches the game editor. Everything is good for making money. Then we move to investment operations, because now players can invest in the virtual world. They can acquire virtual land, build a virtual residence on it, and then resell it on a virtual exchange. It starts with a few $100s and can go up to several $1 million. We succeeded to corner many gamers to sell their own real houses where their family live to acquire a virtual house in one of our applications. Buddha was right to say that the world is only an illusion. And this evolution became possible thanks to the development of electronics. Some may have heard of Moore's Law. Thanks to the unimaginable computing power of data centers which make cloud gaming possible. Thanks to the scriptwriters who put all their know-how to make the game attractive. Thanks to designers who create an eye-catching environment favorable to loss of control. Thanks to programmers who know how to transform all requirements into machine-understandable code. Thanks to psychologists who put all the contribution of noble science to the benefit of a world gone mad. Thanks to marketing experts who deploy treasure of imagination to capture more markets. But in all modesty, it's my contribution as a novel scientist which for 20 years has been decisive. In the end, all are guilty, either out of ignorance, or out of indifference, or out of connivance, or out of self-interest. For my part, as a specialist, I began by updating the discovery of the reward circuit made by Olds and Milner in 1954, which was at the heart of my developments. Olds implanted several rats with a mini electrode in the brain intended to deliver an electrical impulse each time the rat operated a small lever. The results were staggering. The rats could press up to 200 presses by hour for 20 hours straight, with some blasts so strong they propelled them into the air. They even preferred to deprive themselves of food and sleep than to give up their electric shock. Hence the proof of the existence of reward circuit, which pushes, for example, athletes to go beyond their limits despite the suffering endured, and which pushed in the legend Hercules to accomplish his famous labors. Other works have brought to light in the reward circuit the secretion of a hormone, the dopamine, which is responsible for the feeling of well-being and pleasure and commonly called the hormone of immediate happiness. When a person plays too often, the brain will release a very large amount of dopamine too often. The body will demand more and more dopamine in order to continue to have that feeling of pleasure, just like drugs and other psychoactive substances. Exactly like old rats. That's why the World Health Organization has no choice but to recognize what they call video game disorder, and which is, in my opinion, nothing but an addiction to video games. Let's be honest for once and call things by their proper names. My first big idea was to exploit the reward circuit, advising the integration into video games of several types of addictive rewards. The script reward that allows the player to solve a puzzle and unlock the rest of the story. The reward of power through the acquisition of new weapons and new powers granted to the player. The reward by the collectors by allowing the player to acquire the most treasures. The state's reward by allowing the player to reach the expert level. The ego reward given by success in a very difficult game. My second big idea was to exploit the work of Skinner, who had shown that pigeons in a cage get tired quite quickly of obtaining food by pressing a lever. Unless the food is delivered randomly, the pigeons then press this lever continuously until to break their beak. And it's the same reward system that we use today in several video games. It's in fact a conditioned addictive practice thanks to the random loot processes, as with slot machines, which maintain a permanent and addictive excitement within a period of time, which makes it necessary to stay connected for a long time. My third idea was the creation of a virtual world in which the player can move around, meet virtual characters, and confront all kinds of challenges. My fourth big idea was the exploitation of the concept of avatar, which was called the Tamagotchi Effect. Originally, a Tamagotchi was a Japanese virtual pet created in 1996 by the Japanese company Bandai, which the player tries to educate using a miniature console and a computer program. I evolved the idea by creating a player avatar, a magnified double of himself, which interacts alongside other connected players in the virtual world and which has its own life. As the player cannot and does not want to leave his avatar alone in the game, abandoned in a hostile environment, he is obliged to always be connected to his double to help him cope with hazards. Any absence can be costly to the avatar and therefore to oneself. In this way, we completely submit the player to the virtual world. My fifth innovation was to help in the development of touch screens, game consoles, 3D glasses, helmets and cameras, all smart and able to send us your heart rate and even your temperature and stress level. I contributed to the development of game consoles equipped with intelligent sensors able to transmit your genetic profile to us. And all this wealth of personal information, we make it available to those who pay the most, even if some countries prohibit it today. After all, you just have to control yourself, knowing that my job is to keep you from controlling yourself. The excess of dopamine generated by video games has, among other things, the effect of increasing aggression against others, including against one's own parents when they want to put an end to the games through fits of madness. Since most of the dopamine is invested in video games, little will remain for other activities, and the child will fall into lethargy out of play. Your children will no longer want to go out, will no longer want to play sports, because what matters is no longer the body, but its representation in the game. What matters is the avatar, it's the other world. We have long understood that the brain cannot make the difference between reality and imagination. If you believe that video games are a game, then you have understood nothing. Imagination, when transformed into belief, becomes reality. This is what makes your children go from virtual violence to real violence very easily. We no longer talk about video games, but about video religion. Even more serious, the very transformation of the brain, the atrophy of certain areas, and the drop in activity in other areas. Experimental conclusion of a famous Japanese professor, of which we have of course refuted all the conclusions in a scientific way, so to speak. And even when the dead were counted by tens of children and teenagers due to the famous game Blue Whale, the instruction was to pay scientists and psychologists to exonerate the video games, and to repeat everywhere that video games only have an effect if the child and the adolescent are already predisposed to epilepsy, schizophrenia, and suicide. What a beautiful lie. Unfortunately, it also fell on my family, and my granddaughter lost his life there, following the instruction of a video game, facing the train. That's why today I decide to speak out and reveal everything so that it stops, so that we stop sacrificing lives at the altar of money. Because I can no longer bear this feeling of guilt and cover everything and leave, hoping they never find me. But I know from experience that bastards always win.